My name is Michael Chen. I built a $50 million cybersecurity company from nothing, protecting some of the largest financial institutions in America from digital threats. But when my own family dragged me into court, demanding half of everything I had earned, they had no idea they were about to face a threat they never saw coming. Because the single piece of paper I handed to the judge that day didn't just destroy their case. It brought the FBI crashing through those courtroom doors. And everything they thought they knew about me, about themselves, about the empire they had built on lies, crumbled in an instant. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The irony wasn't lost on me as I sat in that sterile conference room in downtown Austin, watching my father's attorney slide papers across the polished mahogany table. Here I was, a man who had spent the last 8 years building digital fortresses to protect other people's money, and my own family was about to rob me blind in broad daylight, using nothing but expensive lawyers and blood relations as their weapons. Robert Chen, my father, sat perfectly still in his tailored charcoal suit, the same one he wore to every important business meeting. His hands were folded precisely on the table, his expression as controlled as always. To anyone watching, he looked like the successful real estate developer he had always been, the patriarch of Chen Development Group, the man who had built shopping centers and luxury apartments across central Texas. But I knew better. I had always known better. My mother, Linda, sat beside him wearing that practiced smile she reserved for country club fundraisers and city council meetings. Her diamond earrings caught the harsh fluorescent light as she tilted her head just so, the picture of refined disappointment. She had perfected that look over the years, the one that said she was suffering through something unpleasant, but would endure it with grace. Ashley, my younger sister, completed the triangle of judgment. She scrolled through her phone with manicured nails, occasionally glancing up with the same smirk she had worn since childhood. Ashley had always been the golden child, the one who followed the family playbook perfectly. Marketing executive, proper marriage, house in the right neighborhood, kids at the right schools, everything I had never been. The attorney, a sharp-faced man named Harrison Wells, cleared his throat and began reading from the document that would supposedly reshape my entire life. The language was dense, legal, but the message was crystal clear. They wanted half of CyberGuard Solutions. Half of everything I had built, every sleepless night, every risk I had taken, every line of code I had written in my garage when I was 24 and stupid enough to believe my family would support my dreams. Their justification was beautifully crafted. The initial capital that helped me start the company, they claimed, had come from family resources. The connections that landed my first major contracts had been through Robert's business network. The office space where I operated for the first 2 years had been provided by Chen Development Group at below-market rates. Therefore, they argued, CyberGuard Solutions was not solely my creation, but a family enterprise that deserved family ownership. I listened to every word, my hands resting calmly in my lap, my breathing steady and controlled. Years of building a business had taught me how to keep my emotions in check during negotiations, how to think 3 moves ahead while your opponent was still planning their opening gambit. They expected me to fight back with anger, to argue about fairness and family loyalty. They expected the Michael they remembered, the one who had always been too soft, too trusting, too eager to please. What they didn't expect was silence. Harrison Wells finished his presentation and looked at me expectantly. Linda leaned forward slightly, her eyebrows raised in that way that suggested she was being patient with the slow child. Robert's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly, the only tell that he was less confident than he appeared. Ashley finally put down her phone. I reached into my briefcase and pulled out a single manila folder. Inside was 1 sheet of paper, unremarkable looking, just black text on white background. But I knew what that paper represented. I knew what it would do to the 3 people sitting across from me. I knew what it would do to their carefully constructed world. My attorney, David Rodriguez, had advised me to wait, to use this information strategically, to negotiate from a position of strength, rather than launching nuclear weapons. But sitting there, watching them carve up my life's work like a holiday turkey, I realized that some battles couldn't be won through compromise. Some fights required total victory. The thing about building cybersecurity software is that you develop certain skills along the way. You learn how to track digital footprints, how to follow money trails through complex networks, how to spot patterns that others miss. When you spend your days protecting financial institutions from sophisticated fraud schemes, you start to recognize those same patterns in unexpected places. For months, I had been noticing irregularities in my company's financial reports. Small discrepancies at first, amounts that could be explained by accounting errors or timing differences. But the patterns were too consistent, too deliberate. Someone with access to my business accounts had been moving money in ways that didn't make sense for legitimate business purposes. The investigation I launched was quiet, methodical, professional. I hired Elena Vasquez, the best forensic accountant in Austin, someone who specialized in white-collar crime and had worked with federal prosecutors. What she found exceeded even my worst suspicions. Elena Vasquez had the kind of mind that could untangle financial webs that would make most accountants weep. She had worked for the IRS Criminal Investigation Unit before going private, and her reputation for finding hidden money was legendary among Austin's legal community. When I first met her in her downtown office, surrounded by computer monitors and stacks of financial documents, she looked at me with the clinical detachment of a surgeon preparing for a complex operation. What she discovered over the next 6 weeks changed everything I thought I knew about my family and myself. The scheme was elegant in its simplicity and breathtaking in its audacity. For the past 3 years, someone with access to CyberGuard Solutions' banking information had been creating false vendor accounts, submitting fraudulent invoices for services that never existed, and routing payments through a complex network of shell companies. The amounts started small, $10,000 here, $15,000 there, amounts that could easily be overlooked in a growing company's busy cash flow. But as my business expanded and our revenue increased, so did their appetite. By the second year, they were siphoning six-figure sums quarterly. The fake consulting contracts were masterfully crafted, complete with detailed work descriptions and professional-looking letterhead, security assessments for non-existent clients, software licensing fees for products that were never developed, maintenance contracts for systems that didn't require maintenance. Elena spread the evidence across her conference table like a prosecutor preparing for trial. Bank routing numbers that led to accounts registered under variations of Chen Development Group subsidiaries. Digital signatures that matched samples from my father's business correspondence. Wire transfer authorizations that bore my Uncle George's electronic signature, a man I had trusted with backup access to our financial systems during my frequent travel to client sites. The total amount stolen approached $3 million. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was how they had done it. Every fraudulent transaction had been carefully structured to avoid federal reporting thresholds. Amounts were split across multiple. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Transfers, timed to coincide with legitimate business payments, and routed through accounts in different states to obscure the paper trail. This wasn't the work of amateur opportunists. This was sophisticated financial crime, the kind that required inside knowledge of banking regulations and deliberate intent to evade federal oversight. Elena pulled up a spreadsheet on her laptop screen, her finger tracing columns of numbers that told a story of systematic betrayal. The timing was particularly cruel. The largest thefts had occurred during periods when I was traveling extensively, building relationships with new clients, working 18-hour days to grow the company that would supposedly secure my family's future. While I was in boardrooms in Houston and Dallas, pitching cybersecurity solutions to bank executives who trusted me to protect their assets, my own family was looting the company I had poured my soul into building. The technical sophistication troubled me most. Someone had gained administrative access to our internal accounting software, understood our client billing cycles, and knew exactly when large payments would be processed. They had studied our business operations with the same attention to detail that I brought to analyzing cyber threats for our clients. The violation felt more intimate than simple theft. It was professional humiliation wrapped in personal betrayal. Elena leaned back in her chair, removing her reading glasses with the careful precision of someone delivering life-changing news. The patterns she had identified weren't just evidence of theft. They were evidence of money laundering, wire fraud, and conspiracy. Federal crimes that carried serious prison sentences. The sophisticated nature of the scheme, the interstate transfers, the deliberate structuring to avoid detection, All of it pointed to organized criminal activity rather than family members taking advantage of an opportunity. I sat in Elena's office as afternoon shadows lengthened across downtown Austin, staring at printouts that revealed my family's true opinion of me. To them, I wasn't a successful entrepreneur who had built something valuable through hard work and innovation. I was a convenient front for their criminal enterprise, a naive techie who could be manipulated while they profited from his success. The company I thought was my life's work had been their personal bank account. The next morning, I drove to Chen Development Group's headquarters for what I knew would be the last family meeting I would ever attend. The building was one of Robert's signature projects, gleaming glass and steel that dominated a full city block near the state capitol. The Chen name was etched in brass letters across the marble facade, a monument to family success that I had always felt excluded from. Now I understood why. Robert was waiting in his corner office, the one with panoramic views of downtown Austin and Lady Bird Lake. The walls were covered with awards from the Austin Chamber of Commerce, photos with mayors and city council members, architectural renderings of luxury developments that bore the Chen Development brand. He sat behind his massive walnut desk, reading something on his computer screen with the focused attention he brought to important business matters. Linda arrived 15 minutes later, carrying a designer handbag and wearing the kind of understated jewelry that whispered rather than shouted about wealth. She kissed Robert on the cheek and settled into one of the leather chairs arranged around a small conference table near the windows. Ashley came last, checking her phone as she walked, her heels clicking against the polished stone floors. They were expecting a family discussion about the lawsuit, perhaps some negotiation about terms or timeline. They were comfortable, confident, united in their belief that I would eventually see reason and accept their claim to half my company. After all, I had always been the accommodating one, the son who wanted approval more than justice, the brother who had never learned to fight back effectively. I placed Elena's report on the conference table without ceremony. The manila folder looked insignificant among the expensive furnishings and architectural models, but I knew its contents would reshape everything in that room. Robert glanced at the folder with mild curiosity. Linda smiled with the patient expression she used when indulging difficult clients at her charity events. Ashley didn't look up from her phone. I began reading from Elena's executive summary, my voice steady and professional. The fraudulent vendor accounts, the shell companies, the wire transfers, the total amount stolen. $3 million over 3 years. Systematic theft disguised as legitimate business expenses. Money laundering through interstate transfers. Federal crimes carrying potential sentences of 20 years in prison. The silence that followed was different from any quiet I had experienced in that office. It wasn't the comfortable pause of people processing information. It was the hollow stillness that comes when carefully constructed lies suddenly collapse under the weight of undeniable truth. Robert's hands remained folded on his desk, but his knuckles had whitened. Linda's smile had frozen into something brittle and artificial. Ashley finally looked up from her phone, her expression shifting from boredom to something approaching alarm. Then Robert laughed. It started as a low chuckle, the kind he used when dismissing business competitors who didn't understand how real deals were made. The sound grew louder, more confident, until it filled the office with its casual cruelty. Linda joined in with her own version of amusement, the polite laughter she employed at social gatherings, when someone told a joke that wasn't particularly funny but came from an important person. Ashley smirked, shaking her head as if I had just announced my intention to join the circus. Robert stood up, walked around his desk, and clapped me on the shoulder with the condescending affection of a father humoring a child's fantasy. He explained, in the patient tone he used with slow contractors and difficult city planners, that I had fundamentally misunderstood the nature of family business relationships. The money I was calling theft was actually profit sharing, compensation for the support and resources the family had provided over the years. Linda nodded along, adding her own interpretation of events. The Chen family had invested in my success from the beginning, she said. The connections that led to my first contracts, the office space, the business advice, the family name that opened doors in Austin's tight-knit business community. Didn't I understand that successful families shared resources and profits? Wasn't I being selfish and ungrateful? Ashley was more direct. She called me naive, said I had always been too trusting and too stupid to understand how real business worked. The money had been sitting there unused, she said, while they had investment opportunities that could benefit everyone. They were helping me, she insisted, by putting that money to work rather than letting it sit idle in corporate accounts. The three of them stood there in that expensive office, surrounded by symbols of legitimate success, and explained to me why stealing $3 million from my company was actually an act of family love. Something crystallized in me as I listened to their explanations, something cold and sharp that I had never felt before. The Michael who had walked into that office, the one who still harbored some desperate hope that this could be resolved through family conversation, died quietly in that moment. What emerged was someone I didn't entirely recognize, someone who understood that mercy was often mistaken for weakness, and that justice sometimes required surgical precision. I nodded slowly as they finished their justifications, gathered Elena's report from the conference table, and walked out of Chen Development Group for the last time. I didn't argue. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't give them the satisfaction of seeing me break down or lose control. I simply left, and in that silence, they assumed they had won. They couldn't have been more wrong. That evening, I sat in my home office in the hills west of Austin, looking out over the city lights as I made the most important phone call of my professional life. Agent Sarah Martinez of the FBI Financial Crimes Division answered on the second ring, her voice crisp and professional, even at 8 o'clock at night. I had met Sarah 2 years earlier, when CyberGuard Solutions consulted on a case involving cryptocurrency fraud. She was brilliant, methodical, and had zero tolerance for white-collar criminals who thought expensive lawyers could shield them from federal prosecution. Sarah listened without interruption as I explained the situation. The systematic theft, the interstate transfers, the deliberate structuring to avoid federal reporting requirements, the sophisticated money laundering operation disguised as family business disputes. When I finished, she asked 3 questions that told me everything I needed to know about what would happen next. First, did I have documentary evidence of the fraudulent transactions? Yes, Elena's forensic analysis provided a complete paper trail with bank records, wire transfer confirmations, and digital signatures. Second, were any of the stolen funds moved across state lines? Yes, the shell companies were registered in Nevada, Delaware, and Florida, with transfers flowing through banks in multiple states. Third, was I willing to cooperate fully with a federal investigation, including wearing recording devices and participating in controlled conversations with the subjects? Yes, without hesitation or conditions. Sarah scheduled our formal meeting for the following morning at the FBI field office on Research Boulevard. She warned me that once we filed the complaint, events would move quickly and irreversibly. Federal investigations into financial crimes operated on a different timeline than family court disputes. There would be search warrants, asset freezes, and arrests. Lives would be destroyed, reputations ruined, futures obliterated. I told her I understood completely. The FBI field office was smaller than I had expected, housed in a nondescript building that could have been any corporate headquarters in Austin's Northwest Corridor. Sarah met me in the lobby precisely at 9 o'clock, dressed in a navy blue suit and carrying a leather portfolio that contained forms I would need to sign to initiate a federal criminal investigation against my own family. Agent Martinez introduced me to her partner, Agent Tom Wilson, a veteran investigator who specialized in complex financial fraud cases. Wilson had the methodical demeanor of someone who had spent decades untangling sophisticated criminal schemes, and his questions demonstrated an encyclopedic knowledge of money laundering statutes and federal banking regulations. We spent 4 hours in a windowless conference room, reviewing Elena's findings line by line, cross-referencing transactions with federal databases, and building a prosecutorial framework that would withstand the kind of aggressive legal defense that my family's wealth could afford. Agent Wilson explained that the interstate nature of the transfers elevated this from simple theft to federal conspiracy charges. The deliberate structuring to avoid reporting thresholds added separate violations of federal banking laws. The use of my business as an unwitting front for money laundering created additional exposure under organized crime statutes. By the end of our meeting, we had identified 14 separate federal violations with potential sentences ranging from 5 to 20 years in federal prison. The systematic nature of the scheme, the sophisticated methods employed, and the large amounts involved would likely result in enhanced penalties under federal sentencing guidelines. Agent Martinez walked me through the next phase of the operation. They would begin immediate financial surveillance, monitoring all accounts associated with Chen Development Group and its subsidiary entities. Undercover agents would pose as potential business partners to document ongoing criminal activity. Most importantly, they would provide me with recording equipment and detailed scripts for conversations with my family members. The plan was elegant in its simplicity. I would continue attending family meetings and court proceedings as if nothing had changed, while secretly gathering evidence of additional crimes and admissions of guilt. The FBI needed recorded conversations to establish criminal intent and consciousness of guilt. They needed my family to discuss their activities in their own words, preferably with specific details about amounts, methods, and future plans. Agent Wilson fitted me with recording devices that were invisible to casual observation, but could capture clear audio from several feet away. The technology was remarkable, sophisticated enough to function in any environment while remaining completely undetectable. They provided me with prepared questions designed to elicit incriminating responses, along with backup strategies if conversations moved in unexpected directions. Sarah handed me her direct phone number and emphasized that I should never attempt to gather evidence without their knowledge and approval. Federal investigations required precise coordination to ensure evidence would be admissible in court and to protect my safety if family members became suspicious. I was now an active participant in a federal sting operation targeting people who had shared holiday dinners with me for 32 years. The psychological adjustment was more difficult than the technical preparation. I had to learn to smile at people who had stolen millions from me while secretly recording their voices for federal prosecutors. I had to attend family gatherings and business meetings as if nothing had changed, while knowing that every word they spoke might eventually be played in a federal courtroom to support their convictions. But something unexpected happened during those weeks of preparation. The anger I had carried for so long began transforming into something more sustainable and more powerful. It wasn't rage anymore. It was clarity. For the first time in my adult life, I understood exactly who my family was and exactly what they thought of me. There was no confusion, no false hope, no desperate attempts to reconcile competing narratives. They had shown me their true faces, and I was finally ready to show them mine. The recording equipment became second nature within days. I practiced conversations in my home office, perfecting the art of appearing relaxed while secretly documenting criminal confessions. Agent Martinez coached me through various scenarios, teaching me how to redirect conversations toward specific topics without appearing obvious or suspicious. The most challenging aspect was maintaining normal family relationships while building a federal case against them. I attended Ashley's birthday dinner at their country club, smiled through toasts and family photos, all while wearing devices that captured Robert's casual discussions of future business opportunities that I now recognized as additional money laundering schemes. During one particularly productive recording session, Linda described in detail how they had used my company's vendor payment system to funnel money through fake consulting contracts. She spoke about it with the same casual pride she brought to describing her latest charity fundraising success, completely unaware that every word was being preserved for federal prosecutors. Uncle George was particularly helpful, providing technical details about their banking procedures and timeline for future transfers. His background in accounting made him careless with specifics, and his trust in family loyalty prevented him from suspecting that his nephew might be working with federal law enforcement. Within 3 weeks, we had recorded over 40 hours of conversations documenting ongoing criminal activity, admissions of past crimes, and detailed discussions of future illegal schemes. Agent Wilson reviewed the recordings with the satisfaction of a craftsman examining perfect work. The evidence was overwhelming, incontrovertible, and devastating. The final phase of preparation involved coordinating with the federal prosecutor's office to ensure that search warrants and arrest warrants would be executed simultaneously across multiple locations. Chen Development Group's offices, my parents' home, Ashley's residence, and Uncle George's accounting firm would all be searched on the same morning. Bank accounts would be frozen, business operations suspended, and assets seized pending trial. Agent Martinez scheduled the operation for the same day as our next family court hearing. While my parents and sister sat in that courtroom, confident that their lawsuit would give them legal claim to half of my company, federal agents would be executing search warrants and preparing arrest documents that would destroy everything they had built on stolen money. The irony was perfect. They would finally get their day in court, just not the kind they had expected. The morning of the court hearing arrived with the kind of crisp October clarity that makes Austin beautiful. I stood on my balcony at dawn, drinking coffee and watching the city wake up below me, knowing that by sunset everything would be different. Agent Martinez had called the night before to confirm final timing. The search warrants would be executed at exactly 10:30 in the morning, 15 minutes after our family court hearing was scheduled to begin. The synchronization was crucial. My family needed to be in that courtroom, under oath, making their claims about rightful ownership of my company, while federal agents were simultaneously gathering evidence of their criminal enterprise. The timing would create an evidentiary record that would be impossible to challenge or explain away. Their own words, spoken under penalty of perjury, would contradict the mountain of evidence being seized from their offices and homes. I dressed carefully that morning, choosing a navy suit that projected competence and respectability. The recording equipment was unnecessary now. We had everything we needed. Today was about revelation, not investigation. Today was about watching carefully constructed lies collapse under the weight of federal law enforcement. David Rodriguez had been briefed on general terms about what would happen during the hearing, though he didn't know the specific details of federal coordination. His job was to keep the family talking, to let them present their full case for ownership of CyberGuard Solutions, to get them on record with as many false statements as possible before the truth emerged. The Travis County Family Court building was a monument to bureaucratic efficiency, all concrete and glass with metal detectors and security guards who had seen every variety of human conflict play out in its courtrooms. I arrived early, walking through the metal detectors with the calm confidence of someone who had nothing to hide and everything to gain. My family was already assembled in the hallway outside courtroom 4B, a united front of expensive legal representation and quiet confidence. Robert wore his best courtroom suit, the charcoal gray one with subtle pinstripes that suggested serious business without ostentation. Linda had chosen understated elegance, her jewelry modest but clearly expensive, her posture erect with the dignity of someone who had never doubted their position in society's hierarchy. Ashley stood beside their attorney, scrolling through her phone with the casual indifference of someone attending a routine business meeting. She looked up when I approached, offering the same polite smile she had perfected for networking events and client presentations. Harrison Wells, their lead attorney, was everything you would expect from a top-tier family law firm. Expensive suit, confident handshake, briefcase that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent. He had built his reputation on protecting wealthy families during contentious disputes, and his track record of favorable settlements spoke to his skill at finding leverage and exploiting weaknesses. Wells approached me with the practiced warmth of a professional negotiator, suggesting we discuss settlement terms before entering the courtroom. His tone implied that reasonable people could surely find common ground without subjecting everyone to the unpleasantness of formal proceedings. He spoke about family relationships and shared prosperity, about the importance of preserving long-term bonds over short-term disagreements. I listened politely, nodded at appropriate moments, and declined his offer with the kind of professional courtesy that masked absolute determination. We would be proceeding to trial. All issues would be resolved through proper legal channels. No settlements, no negotiations, no compromise. Wells looked genuinely puzzled by my position. His experience suggested that family disputes usually ended with negotiated agreements that preserved relationships while redistributing assets. My refusal to engage in settlement discussions violated his understanding of how these cases typically evolved. He glanced at Robert with barely concealed confusion, clearly wondering why his clients couldn't persuade their own son to be reasonable. Judge Patricia Williams called our case at precisely 10:15, and we filed into her courtroom with the formal procession that marked the beginning of serious legal proceedings. The courtroom was smaller than I had expected, with oak paneling and fluorescent lighting that gave everything a slightly sterile appearance. Judge Williams had a reputation for efficiency and impatience with unnecessary drama, which suited my purposes perfectly. Wells opened with a presentation that was masterfully crafted for its intended audience. He spoke eloquently about family businesses, shared investments, and collaborative success. According to his narrative, CyberGuard Solutions was the natural result of Chen family resources, connections, and support. My individual contribution, while significant, was only one element in a larger family enterprise that deserved family ownership. He presented financial records showing early investments in my education and business development, documentation of below-market office space provided by Chen Development Group, and testimonials from business associates who confirmed that family connections had facilitated important early contracts. The case he built was logical, well-documented, and completely convincing to anyone who didn't know about the federal crimes that had funded their apparent generosity. Robert took the witness stand with the confidence of a man who had testified in municipal hearings and zoning disputes throughout his career. His voice was steady, his answers precise, his demeanor that of a successful businessman who was patiently explaining obvious facts to people who had somehow failed to understand them. Under oath, he described the family's investment in my success, the resources they had provided, the ongoing support that had enabled CyberGuard Solutions to thrive. He spoke about profit-sharing arrangements that had never been formalized in writing, but were understood within the family as natural consequences of shared success. When David Rodriguez cross-examined him about specific financial transactions, Robert's answers were smooth and practiced. The money that had flowed from my company to various Chen entities was described as consulting fees, profit distributions, and informal loans that reflected the fluid nature of family business relationships. His explanations sounded reasonable, even generous, to anyone who hadn't seen Elena's forensic analysis. Linda's testimony was equally polished, focusing on emotional investments and family sacrifice. She described sleepless nights worrying about my business, social connections that had opened doors for my company, and the ongoing stress of supporting an entrepreneurial family member through uncertain early years. Her voice carried just the right note of maternal concern, mixed with financial pragmatism. Ashley testified about marketing connections and client referrals, about using her own professional network to generate business opportunities for CyberGuard Solutions. She spoke with the casual confidence of someone who had never doubted her version of events, someone who genuinely believed that her contribution entitled her to ownership stakes in my company. By 10:25, they had presented a compelling case for family ownership of my business. Their testimony was consistent, their documentation extensive, their legal arguments sophisticated. Judge Williams was taking careful notes, asking clarifying questions that suggested she was seriously considering their claims. I checked my watch. 10:27. David Rodriguez was beginning our response when the courtroom doors opened with unnecessary force. Agent Sarah Martinez walked in, followed by Agent Wilson and 2 additional federal agents I hadn't met before. They moved with the kind of purposeful authority that immediately changed the atmosphere in the room. Martinez approached the bench and presented her credentials to Judge Williams, who accepted them with the careful attention that federal identification always commanded. The quiet conversations that had been murmuring through the courtroom gallery stopped completely. Wells turned to look at the agents with obvious confusion. Robert's face had gone pale. Agent Martinez addressed the court with crisp professional language that cut through the careful legal choreography we had been performing for the past hour. She informed Judge Williams that federal search warrants were being executed at multiple locations connected to Chen Development Group and associated entities. She requested that the court suspend proceedings pending resolution of related federal criminal matters. The silence that followed was unlike anything I had experienced in a legal setting. It wasn't the pause of people processing unexpected information. It was the vacuum created when carefully constructed reality suddenly implodes. Judge Williams asked Martinez to approach the bench for a private conference that lasted approximately 3 minutes. During those 3 minutes, I watched my family's expressions cycle through confusion, concern, and dawning recognition of disaster. Robert gripped the edge of the witness stand. Linda's composed expression began cracking around the edges. Ashley looked genuinely afraid for the first time I could remember. When Judge Williams returned to her seat, she announced that the family court proceedings would be suspended indefinitely pending resolution of federal matters. She advised all parties to consult with criminal defense attorneys and warned that any attempts to transfer or conceal assets could result in additional federal charges. Martinez approached our table and handed me a single sheet of paper, speaking loud enough for everyone in the courtroom to hear clearly. The document was a federal seizure order freezing all assets associated with Chen Development Group and its subsidiary entities. Bank accounts, real estate holdings, investment portfolios, everything they had built with stolen money was now under federal control. But that wasn't the paper that mattered. The paper that mattered was still in my briefcase, waiting for the right moment. The paper that would end this charade completely and irreversibly. The paper that would show them exactly who they had been stealing from, and exactly what that meant. I reached into my briefcase and pulled out the final piece of evidence, the one document that Agent Martinez had been waiting for me to present publicly. It was a letter on official FBI letterhead, signed by the Director of Financial Crimes Division, thanking CyberGuard Solutions for our assistance in a 3-year undercover operation targeting money laundering networks in Central Texas. For 3 years, my company had been working with federal law enforcement, providing technical expertise and monitoring capabilities that had led to the identification and prosecution of multiple criminal organizations. The Chen family hadn't just been stealing from me. They had been stealing from an active federal informant whose computers had been tracking their every transaction and whose business had been bait in a larger trap. I handed the letter to Judge Williams and then turned to face my family directly for the first time since entering the courtroom. They had never known who I really was. The letter in Judge Williams' hands contained details that transformed everything they thought they understood about the past 3 years. CyberGuard Solutions hadn't just been a successful cybersecurity company. It had been the centerpiece of a federal operation codenamed Digital Fortress, designed to identify and prosecute sophisticated financial crime networks operating across state lines. My company's client base included not only legitimate financial institutions, but also undercover federal operations that had been monitoring money laundering activities throughout the Southwest. The technology I had developed wasn't just protecting banks from cyber threats. It was actively tracking illegal financial flows, identifying suspicious patterns, and providing real-time intelligence to federal investigators. Every client we protected, every security system we installed, every network we monitored, contributed to a comprehensive surveillance operation that had been building cases against dozens of criminal organizations. Agent Martinez stepped forward and addressed the courtroom with the clear authority of someone delivering prepared remarks that had been coordinated with federal prosecutors. She explained that Michael Chen had been working as a confidential informant for the FBI Financial Crimes Division since the early days of his company's operations. His technical expertise and legitimate business relationships had provided unprecedented access to financial networks that traditional investigation methods couldn't penetrate. The Chen family hadn't just been stealing from their son's business. They had been committing federal crimes against an active law enforcement operation, creating additional charges that carried enhanced penalties under federal statutes, protecting government informants, and ongoing investigations. Robert's face had gone completely white. The confident businessman who had testified so eloquently about family investments and shared success now looked like a man watching his entire world collapse in real time. His hands trembled slightly as he gripped the witness stand, and his eyes darted between Agent Martinez and the federal seizure documents as if searching for some explanation that would make sense of what was happening. Linda's careful composure finally cracked completely. The sophisticated socialite who had built her identity around community leadership and charitable respectability began to understand that her name would soon be associated with federal criminal charges and prison sentences. Her breathing became shallow and rapid, and she clutched her designer handbag with the desperate intensity of someone trying to anchor herself to a reality that was dissolving beneath her feet. Ashley's phone had fallen silent in her lap. The golden child who had always assumed that family connections would smooth any difficulties she might encounter was confronting the possibility of federal prosecution, asset forfeiture, and the complete destruction of everything she had built her life around. Her marketing career, her social standing, her financial security, all of it was now at risk because of crimes she had participated in, without fully understanding their scope or consequences. Harrison Wells, their expensive attorney, was frantically taking notes and whispering urgent consultations with his clients. His expertise in family law had not prepared him for federal criminal defense, and his confident courtroom demeanor had been replaced by obvious concern about the legal catastrophe unfolding around his clients. He requested an immediate recess to consult with criminal defense specialists, but Judge Williams denied the motion. Agent Wilson approached the bench and handed Judge Williams additional documentation that detailed the scope of the federal investigation. Search warrants had been executed simultaneously at Chen Development Group headquarters, Robert and Linda's home in Westlake Hills, Ashley's residence near downtown Austin, and Uncle George's accounting firm. Federal agents were currently seizing computers, financial records, communication devices, and any other evidence that might be relevant to their ongoing criminal investigation. The assets being frozen included not just business accounts but personal holdings, real estate investments, luxury vehicles, and jewelry that had been purchased with stolen funds. The Chen family's lifestyle, their social status, their entire financial foundation, was built on money they had systematically stolen from a federal informant over a period of 3 years. But the deeper revelation was still coming. Agent Martinez opened a thick folder and began reading from documents that revealed the true scope of Operation Digital Fortress. The investigation hadn't begun with my family's crimes. It had started with intelligence suggesting that sophisticated money laundering networks were operating through legitimate businesses in Central Texas, using real estate development and professional services to clean proceeds from drug trafficking, arms dealing, and human trafficking operations. My company had been recruited to provide technical support for the investigation because our cybersecurity expertise gave us legitimate reasons to analyze financial networks and monitor electronic transactions. But as the operation expanded, we discovered that one of the businesses under investigation, Chen Development Group, was connected to the very informant they were relying on for technical support. The irony was staggering. Federal investigators had been preparing to target my family's business when they realized that the family members were already committing crimes against their own informant. The operation had to be completely restructured to account for the unexpected personal dimension. For 18 months, while I was secretly working with federal agents to build cases against external criminal organizations, my own family was stealing money from accounts that were being monitored by federal law enforcement. Every fraudulent transaction, every fake invoice, every wire transfer to their shell companies was being recorded and analyzed by the same investigators I was helping to catch other criminals. Agent Martinez explained that the federal team had been forced to make a difficult decision about whether to arrest my family immediately or allow them to continue their crimes while gathering additional evidence about their methods and contacts. They chose to let the investigation continue because my family's activities were providing valuable intelligence about money laundering techniques and criminal networks that might otherwise have remained hidden. My role had evolved from technical consultant to active participant in a complex operation that required me to maintain normal family relationships while secretly documenting their criminal activities. The emotional cost had been enormous, but the evidence we gathered had led to the identification of criminal networks across multiple states and the seizure of tens of millions in illegal assets. The recording equipment I had worn to family gatherings wasn't just gathering evidence against Robert, Linda, and Ashley. It was documenting their connections to other criminal organizations, their money laundering techniques, and their plans for expanding illegal activities. My parents' casual conversations about business opportunities had revealed links to drug trafficking operations in Houston, real estate fraud schemes in Dallas, and tax evasion networks spanning from Austin to El Paso. Uncle George, the family accountant who had seemed like a harmless accomplice to their theft from my company, was actually a central figure in a money laundering operation that had processed over $50 million in illegal funds over the past 5 years. His professional accounting credentials had provided legitimacy for financial transactions that cleaned money for some of the most dangerous criminal organizations in Texas. The scope of their criminal enterprise dwarfed what I had initially discovered. The $3 million they had stolen from CyberGuard Solutions was just a small fraction of their overall illegal activities. They had been using my successful business as cover for crimes that carried potential life sentences under federal organized crime statutes. Agent Wilson announced that arrest warrants had been issued for Robert Chen, Linda Chen, Ashley Chen, and George Chen on charges including money laundering, wire fraud, conspiracy, racketeering, and obstruction of a federal investigation. The charges carried combined potential sentences of 40 to 60 years in federal prison, with asset forfeiture that would strip them of everything they had acquired through criminal activity. The transformation in the courtroom was complete. What had begun as a family dispute over business ownership had become a federal criminal proceeding that would destroy multiple lives and dismantle a criminal organization that had operated for years with impunity. But for me, the most important transformation was internal. I stood up from the defendant's table and walked to the center of the courtroom, facing my family directly for what I knew would be the last time. 3 years of secret recordings, 18 months of coordinated federal investigation, and decades of personal betrayal had led to this moment when I could finally speak the truth without fear or reservation. I told them that I had never wanted to destroy them. I had wanted to save them, to give them opportunities to stop their criminal activities and repair our relationships through honest conversation and genuine remorse. But they had chosen to continue stealing, to expand their crimes, and to treat me as a convenient victim rather than a family member deserving of respect and honesty. I explained that every chance they had been given to acknowledge their theft and make restitution had been an opportunity for redemption that they had rejected in favor of arrogance and additional crimes. Their dismissive attitude toward my concerns, their condescending explanations of why stealing was actually helping me, their absolute certainty that family relationships gave them the right to take whatever they wanted, all of it had been recorded and preserved as evidence of their criminal mindset. The final revelation was personal rather than legal. For 32 years, I had believed that my worth as a family member depended on their approval and acceptance. I had built a successful business partly to prove to them that I deserved their respect and love. I had endured years of dismissive treatment because I hoped that my achievements would eventually earn their recognition. But working with federal investigators had taught me something crucial about human nature and criminal behavior. People who steal from those closest to them don't do it because they're desperate or temporarily confused. They do it because they fundamentally don't respect the humanity and dignity of their victims. My family hadn't stolen from me despite loving me. They had stolen from me because they didn't truly love me at all. The realization was liberating rather than devastating. I was free from the burden of trying to earn something that had never been available. I was released from the obligation to maintain relationships with people who saw me as a resource rather than a person. I could finally build a life based on my own values and genuine connections, rather than desperate attempts to satisfy people who were incapable of satisfaction. Agent Martinez informed the court that federal marshals were waiting outside to execute the arrest warrants. Robert, Linda, and Ashley would be taken into custody immediately and transported to federal holding facilities pending arraignment on Monday morning. Their attorney would have limited access to them over the weekend, and bail decisions would be made by federal magistrates who specialized in complex financial crimes. As federal agents moved to escort my family from the courtroom, I felt something I hadn't expected. Not triumph or vindication, but profound sadness for the people they might have been if they had made different choices. The parents who could have supported their son's success instead of stealing from it. The sister who could have built her own achievements instead of appropriating others. The family that could have been genuine instead of criminal. But sadness wasn't the same as regret. I had done what needed to be done to protect myself and to serve justice. I had used my skills and resources to help federal investigators dismantle criminal networks that had victimized countless people. I had chosen truth over family loyalty, justice over personal comfort, integrity over the easy path of continued victimization. Judge Williams dismissed the family court proceedings permanently, noting that the underlying premises of the case had been based on fraudulent claims and criminal activity. She commended federal investigators for their thorough work and expressed hope that the resolution would provide closure for all legitimate parties affected by the criminal conspiracy. I walked out of that courthouse into the bright Austin sunshine feeling lighter than I had in years. The weight of family obligation, the burden of seeking approval from people who were incapable of giving it, the exhausting effort of maintaining relationships built on lies and exploitation. All of it was finally gone. 6 months later, I received updates from Agent Martinez about the federal prosecutions. Robert had pleaded guilty to money laundering and wire fraud charges in exchange for a reduced sentence of 12 years in federal prison. Linda had been convicted on all counts and sentenced to 8 years. Ashley had cooperated with investigators and received 5 years with the possibility of parole after 3. Uncle George, the mastermind behind the larger money laundering operation, had been sentenced to 25 years in federal prison and ordered to forfeit over $40 million in criminal proceeds. I used a portion of the recovered funds to establish a foundation that provides cybersecurity training and support for small businesses that can't afford sophisticated protection against financial crimes. The work is challenging and meaningful, protecting people who might otherwise become victims of the same kind of sophisticated theft that my family had perpetrated. The foundation operates from a small office near downtown Austin, far from the gleaming towers and expensive neighborhoods where my family had built their criminal empire. We work with local entrepreneurs, nonprofit organizations, and community businesses that need technical expertise but lack the resources to hire large consulting firms. Every day, I get to use the skills that my family tried to exploit for criminal purposes to protect honest people from the kind of victimization I experienced. The work provides purpose and satisfaction that has nothing to do with recognition or approval from others. It's meaningful because it helps people, not because it impresses anyone. I never hear from my family anymore. They lost the right to contact me when they chose to treat me as a victim rather than a relative. Sometimes I wonder if they understand yet why their world collapsed so completely, if they've learned anything from the experience of federal prosecution and imprisonment. But mostly, I don't think about them at all. I think about the future I'm building, the people I'm helping, the satisfaction that comes from work that matters. I think about the family I've chosen among colleagues and friends, who value integrity over appearance, substance over status. The name Chen still carries weight in Austin's business community, but now it's associated with criminal convictions rather than successful developments. I've legally changed my name to Michael Park, taking my grandmother's maiden name and leaving behind the identity that was built on lies and exploitation. I sleep well at night now, without the nagging anxiety that comes from trying to maintain relationships with people who fundamentally don't respect you. I wake up each morning knowing that my work serves justice rather than enabling crime, that my success helps others rather than providing opportunities for theft. Freedom, I've learned, isn't just about escaping bad situations. It's about building good ones. It's about choosing relationships based on mutual respect rather than blood relations. It's about defining success through personal values rather than external approval. The courtroom where my family's criminal enterprise was exposed is still conducting business every day, resolving disputes and seeking justice for people whose lives have been disrupted by betrayal and crime. I drive past it sometimes on my way to work, and I'm grateful for the role it played in my liberation. Justice isn't always about punishment. Sometimes it's about revelation. Sometimes it's about finally seeing the truth clearly enough to make better choices. I'm making better choices now. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.